As a kid, I was almost entirely unaware there were classic Fox movies. I knew about Fox because of Star Wars, and I watched those all the time and was very familiar with the opening logo, but I had no idea how many classic films. It is Ann Baxter, for those keeping track of me being right or wrong. Um, how many of those classic films they'd done. I mean, it might have even been after I started getting into AMC, which is where I saw The Razor's Edge for the first time after high school. I remember I used to try to track down other Lamar Trotty adaptations back when I was watching a much more focused group of films, sort of hopping from film to film based on someone related to it. And then Ben Nye does some of the makeup. Of course, I can't stop myself from thinking Ben Nye Science Guy whenever I see his name in credits, which is often. I love that. Long intervals. Very deft transition there, too. I don't. Looks like the roof was where they cut it. This, of course, takes place, I believe, in the Chicago area. And I, of course, am from the Chicago area, so I always found it interesting. When I started watching classic movies in my late teens, I think it was immediately. I had started a job in downtown Chicago after working at a video store. And of course, at the video store, I had endless supply of um, videos, but I tended to concentrate on more modern things just based on my coworkers' recommendations. Clifton Webb is such a wonderful addition to any film. I remember getting off track just for a second. The Mr. Belvedere series. My friend's dad was a big fan of those, even though he hadn't necessarily seen The Razor's Edge or Laura. I think he'd probably seen Laura. He's seen lots of movies, but that's how it worked. I talked a lot about what movies I had seen on AMC, and people told me what else to see. But Razor's Edge was. I mean, maybe I saw it because Gene Tierney was in it, because I saw Leave Her to Heaven rather early in the AMC days, which actually really only consisted of a couple years, but I was probably watching 7 or 8 movies a week. Is it necessary to tell the author of the book all of their private affairs? I can't remember if that's in the novel, but I really should figure out what mom thought of this movie sometime. But when I started watching classic movies, there was a certain apprehension because I was familiar with some of them. The Thin Man's, the classic Universal horror movies. But then I sort of jumped to Hitchcock in the 50s. Oh, it's such a wonderful introduction to the cast. I haven't seen this since I wrote about it for the Stop Button, which would have been about, oh, I don't know, 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, because I watched it relatively soon to when the DVD came out in 2005. And that's the thing is that when you have a set, when you're constricted to sets, no matter how much you spend on the sets, no matter how big the sets are, this set actually reminds me of Wolf a little, the end of Wolf. But the sets require you to bring in or allow you to bring in all the cast members in a far more natural way than location shooting can. Um, you just think about the depth in location shooting, and I mean, if you look at how Goulding's shooting this, he's got 4 layers here. He's got our front, um, one, two, three, four, maybe even 5 layers, because you saw the wait staff moving around under the below the deck. I wonder if he keeps this up. Goulding, I mean, if he keeps up the depth of the direction, he might. The the apprehension soon went away. It started because when I watched classic movies as a kid, someone tended to be showing them to me, or I was like, my parents were watching them with friends or family, and so I joined into that activity. It wasn't until after high school that it wasn't until the AMC period that I really tried to discover classic film on my own. I know all this information about. I remember the first time I saw it, that monologue describing Larry. Is I had no idea what was going to happen in Razor's Edge. Um, late 40s. Well, the late 40s doesn't have a lot of mysticism in it, or supernatural mainstream stuff in studio productions. That sort of seems to me to have died out in the mid 30s. But I've been seeing all these movies, movies from the 29, 28, 29, 38, 48, 51, and back, um, all mixed together. So it probably didn't occur to me that the late 40s had a very different um, interest in the supernatural. It wasn't there. So, but I had just seen the old Dark House, which scared the crap out of me when I was a uh, AMC period, and so I just learned that I could not know what to expect from a classic movie just because there wasn't language, violence, or nudity. for quite a while, I concentrated on seeing black and white movies. I'm not sure why exactly. Because I knew I liked them. I knew I liked them from Thin Man. I knew I liked them from the Universal horror movies. One of the first things I bought once I was buying Laserdiscs myself when I was working downtown Chicago was the Myrna Loy box set, which I still don't think all of it's out from Warner Archive. But I was seeing a bunch of movies I'd at best only heard about, like Manhattan Melodrama, which I probably didn't hear about until that year, because this is before the internet. Unless you sat and read all of Leonard Maltin, you picked this stuff up from mentions in articles, books, other people talking, something you happen to catch on TV. And I didn't have TCM at this point. TCM didn't come to whatever cable provider we had until a few years later. Of course, AMC was still good back then. This is Tyrone Power's first scene where he really makes an impression. Seeing Tyrone Power in a tuxedo saying he wants to loaf is kind of amazing. Um, One of the other things about um, going into classic movies so far removed from them is that you don't have any of the built-in preconceptions of actors that Tyrone Power was less popular later in his career or something had no bearing on how I approached Razor's Edge. It would be the same thing if, well, I mean, if you only knew John Travolta from Pulp Fiction to Battlefield Earth, uh, something like that. This Razor's Edge, of course, has some sympathies to uh, Magnificent Ambersons, and that's I'm trying to remember when I first saw Ambersons. I know my dad had the CLV Criterion disc of it. I haven't seen it in 20 years, which is really too bad. Love that edit. Did you see that? So, I do know when I first, saw this movie, I recognized how long the sequence was and how it actually gives me hope for the what is it, the Aaron Sorkin Steve Jobs movie in some ways. Um, that's going to be the long sequences. So one thing about World War I stuff is that I'm not sure if I had read a lot about World War I at this point. Probably not. I might have seen a couple other movies about it. But since I studied it in undergrad, coming back to the movie subsequent times adds all sorts of layers to it that I couldn't have gotten my first time out. Though I might have seen Paths of Glory by this time when I first saw this. That's entirely possible. It's also entirely possible that I didn't. I can't remember if Gene Tierney and Tyrone Power did another movie together. I read the book immediately following seeing the movie. That Razor's Edge was like a huge hit in '46. It it puts it in sort of the Godfather category of popular American film, being good too. I'm not sure when I would say that genre died, but I bet you could figure it out through Box Office Mojo. But I read the book and I remember there was a lot more information about the American Express and him picking up his mail, and I thought it was really cool to discover that's where the brand came from. Even when Clifton Webb's a villain, he's so incredibly likable, like in Laura. Wait, I didn't just spoil Laura. Never mind. Excuse me. Now we've got, the deep frame again, 2 layers. The natural way that they integrate mom into this is so. I mean, seeing it the first time, I wouldn't have known that he was the writer of the novel. I mean, maybe I did, or maybe I was aware of it, but I had certainly not read the book yet. I hadn't thought about it. I didn't know that in the remake, which I think I had heard of, the not the remake, the readaptation with Bill Murray. I think I'd heard of it, but not seen it or had any interest in seeing it. I later found out from someone I worked with that they cut the mom character out of the readaptation. The idea that Elliot is going to lock up this huge house. Did Herbert Marshall and Richard Burton ever do a movie together? That would have been amazing. Just the layers of the narrative are fantastic. And I feel like it'd be very hard to do this sort of arrangement today just because the agreement between audiences and movies is so much different. In some ways, the modern movie is it's like audiences think they deserve more responsibility for reading the movie, whereas here Goulding is very precise. Look at that backdrop. Oh, I love it. I mean, that's one of the most tragic things about this story and the film is that Gene Tierney's Isabel is pretty awesome. So there's there's that element of tragedy later. What's funniest about not funniest, but Razor's Edge is incredibly readable. The book, and it took me forever to get through of Human Bondage. Again, we're in Eliot's recollections of this. Oh, the dialogue is just so good. Sorry. It's hard not to just watch Clifton Webb. Now we're back on a set. It seems like she only got here last scene. I think I'd probably read Movable Feast at this point. So I had some context for The American in Paris. But you just can't create this shot on location. I've probably told this story somewhere before, but when I went to the Block Museum's film series, my wife and I used to go to that a lot. And my dad, I'm trying to remember, I think we might have drugged my mom once, maybe even my sister, not sure for what. But it's at Northwestern and they show, there's like a projectionist club and they show film series. And one of the things they showed was Gance's Napoleon, and it was presented by a history professor who said uh, the silent drama is like a different medium than the speaking drama, and so the studio picture of the late 40s is a different medium from one of the than a cinemascope movie than a 70s movie, and it's picking up on seeing where the movie is in sort of the development of cinema, and you can look at what is it's taken from before and what it's going to give to the future, but it's part of this movie is from 1946 and not really arguing some sort of classic movie relativism, um, because there's no prime directive of classic movie watching, but Goulding's and Darryl F. Zanuck's artistic intent isn't different necessarily than, say, Scott Rudin and Wes Anderson's. It's the tools they have to present these artistic ambitions are completely different. When you say all film is the same because it's in a theater or whatever, that's not accurate. There's too many nuances to how a film's made to um, not have a specific sense of how to digest it. If mom actually was idealistic about this type of personage emerging after World War II, she must have been incredibly disappointed. And of course, there's the context that Tyrone Power was a World War II veteran who this was his first movie after coming home, and it's a movie about a guy coming home from World War One. That audiences would have had to play into it. That it was a zeitgeist movie is incredibly interesting. Who shot this? I wish I'd paid attention. Did you see the focus come in on Gene Tierney's face for the turn and then leave for the turn back? Goulding also directed Of Human Bondage, the 46 version, I think. It's the same year as this. I think it's 46. And here we go. The focus is coming back. Oh, so good. I was really into uh, Grapes of Wrath around this time too, and I was talking to a friend of mine who I worked with at the video store, and he was not a fan of John Ford. Uh, and we got into a discussion about Greg Toland shooting Grapes of Wrath versus Greg Toland shooting Citizen Kane. And I actually always think that there's more of a Orson Welles influence on John Ford than others might. If you watch The Fugitive with Henry Fonda, it's like watching a Welles movie. These guys using all sorts of different tools. It's just and then of course Gene Tierney makes everybody want to be a fashion expert, which hopefully is as sexist as I'll get on this commentary. Um, I actually think I remember that outfit on Gene Tierney from when I was 17 or 18. I remember when I first saw Some Like It Hot, my mom was, I was, 8 or 9. My dad and I rented the Laserdisc from Blockbuster because the Blockbuster we went to get me Godzilla versus Megalon or whatever had Laserdiscs. And then my dad got a Laserdisc player and set off my Laserdisc thing 10 years later and my DVDs. And thankfully, I've jumped off that ship with Blu-ray, and I'm much more sparing in my purchases. But I remember my mom asked my dad what I thought of Marilyn Monroe after seeing Some Like It Hot. Like, had it zonked my mind as a 9 or 10-year-old. But I would have been younger than that. It would have been like 8. um, but of course, discovering Gene Tierney is because I'd heard of her. And I think the first Gene Tierney movie I saw was Leave It to Heaven, but I was only seeing stuff like MGM Classics. I wasn't really a big Clark Gable fan. Even now that I am a Clark Gable fan, I still haven't seen a lot of Clark Gable movies. I did see quite a few Tyrone Power movies, but it was Leave Her to Heaven, and Leave Her to Heaven has that terrible performance. Is it Cornell Wilde? Can't remember his name. And it was funny because like I said, I was talking to people about the movies I'd seen. So I was telling my mom I'd watch Leave Her to Heaven. I think I actually told my mom what I thought of movies. I remember I did it with Wolf, but apparently I also did it with Leave Her to Heaven. And she was commenting on Cornell Wilde's performance, and then we were talking about Gene Tierney. So I saw Laura, I saw this, I saw Leave Her to Heaven, I saw The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, all in the same 2-year period, I'd say, at the most. I'd argue that the use of depth in this scene is totally different because it's not important. It's all sort of one layer, and they just happen to be part of that layer. I guess AMC must have had a lot of Fox movies because I saw Anastasia back then too, and Peyton Place, and Wild River. which I'll have on a later commentary podcast. I don't think that guy's singing. I never got Razor's Edge on Laserdisc. I'm not sure why. Maybe there wasn't one. High culture to low culture. Very discreet transition. Curious to see if Larry's actually going to be any more engaged here. Yep. I saw Where the Sidewalk Ends, too. That's the Gene Tierney reteaming with Dana Andrews. It's terrible. See, it was low culture. That's why there was a fight with sailors. But that's a perfect example of how you can be obvious, and it doesn't really matter if you're obvious as long as you're doing it really well, which Goulding does. Here's where we start to see some of the evil Isabel we'll see later. I think in the novel, Larry spends the night at this point. Can't quite remember. I think I read the book twice, which is uncommon. There's a number of books I read in high school that I have not been back to and have been meaning to get back to since, I was 19. Yeah, Larry definitely spends the night in the book. I was able to talk to my aunt and grandmother a lot about classic movies too. Have the red shoes been made yet? 46. When's the red shoes? I'm actually going to look this up. I'm a little curious because that sequence right there. Red Shoes is 48. Red Shoes is 2 years after this. That's very surprising. Maybe he doesn't spend the night in the book. Great sound design. I mean, just great sound design. Oh, this is when he tells her. Oh, that's right. Here's our the Emperor seduces Anakin scene. So you can't get away with that now. You can't if you tried to get away with the villain saying how villainous they are, we've gotten to a point where the James Bond movies, 70s exploitation, has just gotten it to such an exaggerated point that we've lost this storytelling device. I was shocked that I was seeing this in a movie from the 40s when I saw this the first time. Middle Western horse sense. Oh, look at that shot. Uh, Razor's Edge is a great movie to get somebody apprehensive about classic movies into classic movies. And growing up, I was very enthusiastic about the classic movies that I liked. The Universal movies, the Thin Man movies. And there were numerous people who just would not watch black and white movies. Kids, I mean. And of course, let's not forget that Peter Jackson had to remake King Kong because he was so upset that kids refused to watch the original. And now Mom is back. Mom's back at 44 minutes. So he's been gone for a half hour. And look, and there's Sophie in the background. And here she's coming in. And she stands up to him. That's why we love Sophie. And of course, I mean, her husband isn't that bad. He's an okay capitalist vet guy. It's so hard to visualize this in any way an accurate portrayal of Mom by himself. Breakfast of Champions didn't include Vonnegut, which is sort of unfortunate. So now we've got the nice transition with the last time they were in Chicago together, and here Larry is disconnected from that lifestyle, from that world 45 minutes in. So this is sort of like part two of the Razor's Edge. I wonder if there's a part three. A lot of French language spoken. He's in real France now. And now they've switched to English, of course. Oh, they're speaking English because he's German, not French. Is he a drunk or a Nazi? So here we go in part two. Tyrone Power becomes the lead of the film for the first time. See, the reason Razor's Edge can get away with the metaphysical is a scene like this, where you have a philosophical discussion between these two, and it turns out that this guy's been thinking too. And that probably would have been a big deal in 46, atheism in a movie. Here's the foreshadowing. We're looking at Larry, an older, failed Larry. You only get away with that first thunder strike when you get to these subsequent ones, and the way they time that. And here comes the sound back again. Somebody I was always really impressed with how they did that in Heat with De Niro and Pacino, but people have been doing it forever. That wasn't rear screen. It was always a set. Well, maybe it was rear screen, just well edited rear screen. I thought he went to India later. There's no reason matte paintings. Wow, just look at that painting. Um, that might not even. That's not a matte. That's just the wall or this set. Um, the realism digital matte brings, the CG mats and all that crap. When you're trying to look real all the time, there's nothing to appreciate. There's no artistry to it. What's different about the first Jurassic Park is it's designed to enthrall the viewer with its special effects, which has been entirely lost. And you got to realize I'm watching this in 90 what, 7 98. With the exception of Scorsese, there's not a lot of discussion of religion in film anymore at that point, late 90s. No spiritualism. And regardless of where you stand on that issue, it is part of the human condition and should be dramatized. Of course, now we have tons of it, and it's crappy Christian movies. Chasing a buck, really? Okay, sorry. Um, by not having as diverse an audience. Okay, wow, okay, here we go. By not caring about your audience's diversity, you are able to target. You're not targeting so precisely that you're mercenary. That's the difference between South Korean film, mainstream film, and American film. And that's what classic movies are like. And I could be entirely wrong about South Korean film. They could be targeting diverse um, audiences. But since I'm not South Korean, I don't identify that. So that would be a British guy in India, actually. So now we're back with the rest of the cast. What a jerk doctor. I've still never seen All About Eve. Ann Baxter was in Woman in White too, I think. Or no, that was Alexis Smith in Woman in White, wasn't it? Did she win supporting? She really should have won supporting for this. Oh God. Goulding's now directing her the same way he directs Gene Tierney, which is interesting, especially if the way he directs Tierney changes now. But again, all that's doing is telling the viewer what's been going on when away from Larry's story. So that level of control over the viewer's experience is, you don't do that anymore. You also don't wear your waist that high. That would be another thing you see in old movies is the changing fashion of the waist. So what the shack is real. So what it that could be a matte painting. Um, I remember in the late 90s when around the time I saw this, they were using digital mats that were still not realistic yet. Mumford had a digital backdrop um, back when CGI, everybody was excited to use it to any degree. Screamers, of all things, did that too. They added the tops of the sets through digital mats, which actually I assume they're doing in Batman versus Superman because it's all filming in Detroit, but they'll have to differentiate. The difference between a studio movie and something like LaRue by Abel Gance is that he actually was on the mountain, I assume. Or he just had a really great set, but I remember the mountain scene in that was far more realistic, yet had more in common with Razor's Edge than it does with something today, than it does with Cliffhanger or something, which of course does have fake mountain sets. Um, the one place people were comfortable with that was with stuntmen. Um, in action movies, it was actually stuntman being James Bond, being Arnold Schwarzenegger, being whoever. Um, and of course, then we started CGIing people's faces over the stuntmen, starting in Jurassic Park with Ariana Richards. But people were willing to be enthralled with the spectacle uh, while letting themselves be removed from the reality of it, which we don't have anymore. We want the reality all the time. And our stunt work is digitally edited, digitally composed. Um, unless, of course, you're Jet Li and you punch too fast for the camera. See, that's Razor's Edge is kind of a character study, a little bit. I mean, in a way too technically accurate way, it's a character study, but it's very epical. His sideburns look like he was shooting a western at night. I think he did a western, didn't he? Maybe one. Just the amount of sets for this is incredible. That they use them for a scene or two. Think about that French, the multiple French sets, and that's being able to paint. That's what that is. Versus the Universal ones, which you buy into the Frankenstein monster, you buy into the fake backdrops, and you appreciate them for what how they work and the mood they lend, and you don't worry about them being necessarily as real as possible. You don't mind seeing the the filmmaking going on, whereas now everything's hiding the filmmaking. I think the Mr. Belvedere's are out from Fox archive, which means they're really crappy prints, but I probably have them recorded off a Fox movie channel anyway. I should definitely see those next year. There you go. He's waving the author into the story. He's been gone for 23 minutes. We're doing time transitions very deliberately but gently. Wow. So good. Exposition. Just beautifully done exposition. You get half pure pleasure, unfunctional pure pleasure of getting to hang out with Clifton Webb, bragging, and then you get this exposition. And now we've gone through a different door, so that is not where Mom went into the shop. And then you get a reward for your exposition. A little bit of Niles Crane there, an early Fraser. So sympathy is the lack of selfishness is different in the novel. It's still incredibly ambitious that they try to attempt it in a film. You know, it almost seems like if Razor's Edge were about British people as opposed to Americans, it'd be prime for BBC miniseries adaptation. Such a good performance from Herbert Marshall. And she's teaching her children to speak French, which will be important so they can be ambassadors someday or ambassadors' wives. So we're 8 years from the first Paris scene or so. Don't have introductions. Well, you don't have kids without them being more full featured characters in a film. You do on television, but you don't in movies. Again, it's because you're targeting a diverse audience, or you're recognizing the diversity in your audience and targeting specifically. Great makeup too on Herbert Marshall. Sort of discreet aging. Because Herbert Marshall didn't get a lot of close ups earlier. I hope somebody makes a hypnosis app for the Apple Watch. Goulding and Tyrone Power went on to make Nightmare Alley, where he plays a mentalist. So I wonder if they got the idea that Tyrone Power would be good at it from this one. No music, just reaction shots and incredulity, which is exactly what you'd be getting in your audience. So many people in the scene. I love it. Interesting. Interesting little scene tag there. There's nothing but to let Gene Tierney shine. Wait, is Elliot broke? No, I don't think so. Depth and composition, 3 layers. See, there you go. They're they're aging, whereas Tyrone Power doesn't. And into the scene they come. So 4 layers because we had that back path, so we still have the fourth layer. Evil Gene Tierney. The author telling his creation it's her business, not his. And I believe Sophie is going to be at this club because it's about time for her to get in. So we didn't do the party at all. We didn't do dinner at all. We just exited. Here's real France because they're speaking French. And another gigantic set. Amazing set decoration on this. So many crowd scenes too. Goulding giving all these little moments to this un uncredited cast, and it's Sophie. I can't remember who plays who in the Bill Murray remake, readaptation, the Bill Murray version. Sorry, I think Denholm Elliott plays Clifton Webb. You can't do this scene directed this way in anything but 133, anything but Academy. The way you can focus on a performance from an actor in Academy is totally different from um, 185 or 235. And if you think about it, it's because you can't do a close up of someone's eyes. Uh, you get too much of the face in the shot, so you don't use that unless you block it out, like silence would do. Let's not forget that Gray was. Wow. Such a good performance from Ann Baxter. Gotta love that the band stopped for her delivery. I wonder if they shot that all with the same background players. There was that tall guy with the really short girl. I don't know. The blonde looked familiar. So graze over his breakdown. He's a dick now, and she's awful. And there we go. See, Herbert Marshall sort of replaced Clifton Webb in some ways at this point, but oh, this is such a great scene. Tyrone Power was in Hotel Metropole, which I still haven't seen. That's actually out. Fox actually released a nice box set of 30s Tyrone Power stuff, I believe. But it was still, 2009 or something. They were still trying. We faded to black, so I'll bet we're a month later. Yep. Here's the aloofness that Herbert Marshall was talking about. That there's something seductively evil about Gene Tierney. Well, just flat evil right there. Love this scene construction. Just again, well, now we really don't because of cell phones. We're not going to have that sort of conversation, but that sort of went to television. It was not part of film vocabulary for quite a while. So here, what we've got is Tierney now getting the sort of direction she got in part one, which, but it's totally different. Now we have Tierney is Clifton Webb. The relationship between Herbert Marshall and Gene Tierney is now closer to the relationship between Herbert Marshall and Clifton Webb than it's Clifton Webb, but evil and unamusing. It's great. And I guess she wasn't the first pick. I think that I thought I read it was Maureen O'Hara, and she told Linda Darnell, and she wasn't allowed to tell anybody, so it was Gene. They gave it to Gene Tierney because Darryl F. Zanuck was pissed off. I could be entirely wrong, but I don't think I am. And the cool thing about that is that well, the strange thing is that with Laura, you have this wonderful tie between Gene Tierney and Clifton Webb. Oh, I love it. If she was wearing any old age makeup, they've taken it off. This is an amazing scene. I and at this point, of course, Larry's no longer the protagonist. Wow. 5 people in this scene. There we go. Oh, Larry's kind of onto it. Look at mom watching Isabel. See, it's so weird because we've gotten to this point where Larry's gone from being the enlightened one to not being enlightened enough to prevent this tragedy. I wonder if they got along. And Baxter and Gene Tierney. When you think about it, Ann Baxter only really has like 5 scenes in this movie. And Goulding's style has changed here. You need to stay away so Uncle Elliot and I can kill you. And trying to imagine. I think Gene Tierney had a kid in Leave Her to Heaven too, right? There's a daughter, maybe. There you go. That was Somerset Maugham on the telephone, the author of the book. Wow, so evil. Look at the outfit that Gene Tierney's in now. Can you imagine her playing the villain in Sleep? Wow, just Sleeping Beauty, the Maleficent. I don't think Gene Tierney ever played like a Faye Dunaway, Betty Davis villain. I don't know if it would have worked. Here it's just so. Oh, look how much she's drinking. So we know nothing about their actual relationship. We haven't seen it. Sophie and Larry's in private. The movie doesn't really have anything in private. We've never seen Gray and Isabel together. She's doing something with the kids. Yeah. Wow. Wow. We got some we got some more of the fading here. I gotta see who the focus, I'm sorry, not the fading. Fading is because, you know, that's what you would call it now. Um the director of photography is on this. Arthur C. Miller. Oh, who shot How Green Was My Valley? Oh, he shot the Oxbow incident. Oh, wow. Okay. And look at that. Is she leaving? Like, just, oh, so good. This is her test. Oh, he showed a letter to three wives, too. Oh, why did he retire in 51? Anyway, can Sophie resist? Of course not. Look at that. Who wouldn't want to drink all of Elliot's expensive booze? Look at the change in posture. Somewhat rare use of music, which we have not had in a while. Not uh, what's it been longer since music or mom narrating? What we understood Sophie and we understood American. Is that the same music as the first time there? Could be. Oh, that girl was in it before. Great set, used very restrained, and now. See, we're coming up on 2 hours, but it doesn't feel like it because we're still in Razor's Edge Part 2. So, doing that separation point between Isabel and Larry's engagement breaking off and her marriage to the rest of the movie, it also helps that the scenes are very long. Even in this tiny cafe, opium den, whatever, you've got this large background cast going on. Is that woman pregnant? Again, kind of impossible to imagine. shifting attention to her should be some very um but she's coming back, so it's almost like is the movie gonna follow her to, well, we just brought Tyrone Power right back in. Little bit of music, fade to black. So we've aged a little bit. Narration's back. We've got the explanation of that frame. Sort of an explanation of why um, excuse me, the time transition. But also now we're in part three, and that's why you can get away with not having not having his narration in a lot of part two. Aged a little bit more in the makeup. Again, very grown up for 1947, 46. And I do have to point out that they comment on the police officer comments on mom having a distinction. It sets him up as not like Elliot, who doesn't have one. Our present action just hit 10 years. So in part three, mom is the lead, which is, or the protagonist in some ways. Not in some ways, in a certain way of thinking about the term of he's the focus. The story's told through his perspective. Her, Describing her with her throat cut, of course, is very vivid and helps the fact she's only in 6 scenes. I can't remember what happens in the interval in the year after the fight in the cafe. Um, it's in the novel, I'm sure, but I don't remember. This could be different. Just hit the policeman with effectiveness. And so we're ending with Uncle Elliot, and just like we opened with him. Now we're closing the door on Sophie, right? And the grand party has now become just this. So dying Elliot is a little bit nicer. So much sympathy for such a jerk. Very good scene. Just Lamar Trotty's script once again. I wonder what the average number of people per scene in this movie is. I'm guessing three. Is that David with a fig leaf? I think that's David with a fig leaf. Ah, the French Riviera, where people just hop into window. Elsa Lancaster, everybody. Bride of Frankenstein. I think she's in witness for the prosecution, right? Just again, Trotty's script. I don't know if this is in the novel. I can't imagine it. It's so light and just perfectly acted by Elsa Lancaster. And the way that now we've established that Tyrone Power is devastatingly handsome and charming is just a wonderful transition. And there, the priest just sums up what the viewer thinks about Elliot, that he's basically okay. He's just obnoxious on the surface. I love how the butler kisses the bishop's ring. I sort of remember in Of Human Bondage there being something about the afternoon when Philip Carey's growing up. Gray's gonna make good. Oh, with the crown there and everything. I'm sorry I wasn't talking, but you really cannot be distracted from Clifton Webb's performance in this. Why is Larry leaving? Gray's going back to America. He could stay with Isabel. We just got all that in 40 seconds. Code or no code. Not even 40 seconds. That was probably 20 seconds. Now that she's got Elliot's money, there's just so much unbridled evil. That's not David. That's what's his face, isn't it? It's Dave. Yeah, it is. That's David, isn't it? David and Goliath. That's David. I think he had a hat on too. See, this would read really fast in the book, even if Trotty's just directly lifting her dialogue, which I don't remember if he is. It would read really fast in the book. In the movie, you get the Gene Tierney performance too, and all the weight of her choices in the role coming in now. And then you've got the way Mom's directing it, or I'm sorry, the way Goulding's directing it, how it's pinging back and forth between the characters. And look how slick Larry is now after Sophie's died. And he was trying to explain this to her and to us in the first scene. See, he's still being selfless in this. There's still this noble aspect to her, and she gets that. It's this perversion of Elliot's behavior. Look at Goulding's direction of this scene. Look at that focus Arthur Miller's doing just on her face, not on her hands. Look at that. This must have been amazing to see on a actual movie theater and not a TV or a computer screen. And there we go. Boom. He was going to walk out. He was going to let it go this whole time. And then she just tried to, well, I mean, in some ways, she just tried to talk to him on what she saw as his level. It's human not frailty, it's a human defect in him that's still there. Makes him a hero, but philosophically speaking. Oh, that drunk butler. I love how much younger Jean Tierney seems than she did when we first meet her again with the kids. There's like a mix of. Is this all one shot? It can't be. Should have been paying attention. See, there you go. It's all Sophie's fault. Ugh. See, just look at what Trotty and Goulding are able to do. So many constraints, and they're able to do all of that. And is Isabel gonna be better? Possibly not. Nope, she's not. She didn't learn anything. She's a child again. Gobi Desert. I love it. So she's secretly evil, but she wants to feel good, whereas Elliot was secretly good but wanted to be perceived as evil. And we go out on the film's worst background painting. Other than that, we're doing good. Um, yep, Cecil Humphreys is the holy man. And that was The Razor's Edge. Sorry, I fell off in the third act. I was a bit busy watching the movie, but if you stuck through, thank you.